On Australian TV, we've recently begun to see shifts in the cultural diversity of the actors playing characters in Australian dramas. Screen Australia's report, Seeing Ourselves, Reflections on Diversity in Australian TV Drama, maps this really, really well. So the Seeing Ourselves report examined all 199 Australian dramas screened between 2011 and 2015. 64% of these shows, or around about 2/3, had at least one non-Anglo actor. Now, 18% of characters on Australian TV dramas came from non-Anglo backgrounds. However, 32% of the population in Australia come from non-Anglo backgrounds. So here, what we're seeing is an underrepresentation, a proportional underrepresentation of people from non-Anglo backgrounds in Australian TV drama. So for argument's sake, if around 1/3 of the population of Australia is from a non-Anglo background, then if the media really accurately reflected the cultural diversity of Australia, we would expect to see around about 1/3 of our main actors in Australian TV dramas coming from non-Anglo backgrounds. But that's significantly not the case. 24% of actors were non-Anglo. So to give a bit of clarity around this, so around about a quarter of all actors in Australian TV drama were non-Anglo. Now this suggests some colourblind casting, which helps to normalise cultural diversity. In other words, what we're seeing is casting practices which don't pay attention to a person's cultural background. They're just cast because that's who they are. We want this actor to play this role. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the person, it doesn't matter if this character in the drama is Indigenous, from a Middle Eastern background, or Anglo. It doesn't matter at all. So we increasingly see that people from non-Anglo backgrounds are being cast in those types of roles. So we're seeing some evidence of colourblind casting beginning to appear in Australian TV drama. Now, one of the really big areas where we've begun to see improvement is in the casting of Indigenous characters. So in 1992, there were no Indigenous characters in Australian TV dramas. Think about that. Think about how just ridiculous that seems. So in 1992, there were no Indigenous characters in Australian TV dramas. And 7 years later, there were only two. There were only two Indigenous characters. Fast forward to 2016, what we're seeing now is that 5% of main characters in Australian TV dramas are Indigenous, compared to an Indigenous population of 3%. So here, in terms of Indigenous representation in Australian TV drama, we're beginning to see an over-representation in some ways. And that's not a criticism of the practice. It's just to point out that 5% of main characters in Australian TV dramas are Indigenous, compared to an Indigenous population in Australia of around about 3%. So 3% of the Australian population identify as being Indigenous Australians. So slightly more main characters in TV dramas than the overall population. Now, this is the result, this increase in representation is the result of policies to increase Indigenous participation in the media. So we can also begin to see the success of those types of policies, which are designed to support Indigenous creatives in being able to establish themselves in the creative industries. Now, this table demonstrates the proportional representation of actors in Australian TV dramas compared to the overall population. So here, the top line, we have the percentage of Anglo-Celtic, European, non-European, and Indigenous people that make up the Australian population. The middle bar is the proportion of the proportion of TV drama characters, and then the final bar is actors playing particular characters. So we still see that Anglo-Celtic actors dominate the casting of Australian TV drama. However, we're beginning to see some shifts, and over time, hopefully, we will begin to see a move towards a more proportionate representation. So in other words, what we'd want to see is, in the case of, let's say, for argument's sake, the non-European characters. So, and we're talking about people from Asian and Middle Eastern backgrounds, African backgrounds, of course, South American backgrounds, Latin American backgrounds. So those cultural groups make up around about 17% of Australia's population. What we'd like to see, or what would be ideal in terms of providing a more accurate reflection, are those 7 and 10% in terms of TV drama characters and actors playing characters, moving closer over time towards 17%.